Hi, this is John Sarver, and welcome to the 10th session in our My Solar Story series that are sponsored by GLREA and my son. And tonight we have Josh Haas talking about his 15 kilowatt ground mount system in Hickory Corners. You see the picture right there up on the screen. And I think this is going to be an interesting presentation because Josh also has does EV charging and has a geothermal heating and cooling system. As in previous sessions, please mute yourself until we get to the question and answer period at the end of the session. And with that, Josh, go for it.
All right. Well, thank you, John. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. First and foremost, the reason I'm so excited to be here is because I love sharing, much like other solar owners, what we've done. Not only to go green, but invest in earning revenue on our own with our own power, no pun intended, and certainly one of the better investments that we've certainly gotten into. So getting right into it, just a little bit about our property here in Southwest Michigan. We're in Barry County, about a half hour northeast of Kalamazoo. Most of you are probably familiar with Kalamazoo, Michigan. And we have a pretty simple 1,500 square foot walkout ranch. And so the walkout part is nice because about 3/4 of our basement is fully finished. And that's important because from a heating and cooling and power perspective, we use that space quite a bit through summer, spring, fall, and winter. And so it's heated and cooled, which obviously accounts for more square footage than what, the realtor would tell you the house is consisting of. So aside from that, we're sitting on about 12 acres of mostly prairie grassland. We have got some trees throughout here and there, but for the most part, it's wide open space. And my wife and I saw that as prime, 11 years ago when we moved into this property and tried to get out, from the city. We saw it as prime and long term, we knew we wanted to do something like this. We're all electric, and part of that means no fuel, so no propane, no natural gas. It's not even available here. And that propane is expensive, especially, 8-10 years ago when we first moved in. And so by having all electric, we slowly were able to, get away from the fuel. And the first thing that we did to get away from propane was to install the geothermal, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Lastly, I do have an EV charger, so it's not like a Tesla or full EV. It's a hybrid plug-in. It's a 2016 Chevy Volt, and it has about an 18 kilowatt sized battery, and Chevy lets you charge just a little over 14 kilowatts. And so it takes about 4 hours from a zero charge to full on a 240 volt charger. And so that obviously represents a pretty good draw. But interestingly enough, I didn't get the EV until after we went solar. I wanted to make sure that we were charging it with green energy as opposed to coal energy. So I won't get into the politics of that, but that was just a choice that our family made. So our initial solar setup, we went with a 13 kilowatt, 42 panel ground mount system. A lot of people ask why we went ground mount. Well, as I said earlier, we have all the space in the world. I mean, 12 acres of grassland. It's a real easy to find a spot to have 100% open sun. So that was a real easy no-brainer decision. It is a grid tied system with Consumers Energy here in Barry County. And I got to tell you, I have had just a wonderful time working with Consumers Energy. I've heard so many horror stories of people struggling with other utilities, and it's been just wonderful with Consumers. So a little shout out to them. I know they don't always, the utilities don't always get the best of press. However, I've had really good luck with them. So being that it's grid tied, for those that don't understand what that means, it means that during really cloudy situations or at night, when solar's obviously not generating power, I'm still using grid power. But the cool thing is all summer long, like right now, I mean, it's been gangbuster, generating tons of power. May and June have been just huge sunny months. And I'm generating way more than we would ever use in the summer. And so everything extra gets dumped onto the grid, and Consumers keeps track of it. And we get pretty much a 1-for-1 credit, retail credit for those kilowatt hours that I dump into the grid. And so all those credits build up. And at night and during the times in winter when we're not generating enough, those credits pay our bills. So we've essentially said goodbye to power bills, at least for the first 10 years. And so I say 10 years because we're basically grandfathered into the current retail rate through 2028 because we installed our solar in 2018. And they're already, lobbying to change the crediting program, which will surely be worse than the retail 1-for-1 rate. We don't know consumers yet. We don't know what that will end up being, but I'm basically on a 10-year plan. And when 2027-ish comes around, I'm going to be really looking seriously. And I'm hopeful that in the next 8-9 years that the battery technology will just continue to get better and cheaper. And so hopefully around that time, we'll be able to invest in maybe a battery setup that could take us off grid. But time will tell. We'll see what happens. In terms of the company we worked with, 4 Elements Energy, Art Toy, he's a member of GLREA and on the Facebook group. Really, really great guy. Good company to work with right here in Southwest Michigan, and they did the initial install. So these are some pictures just to show it coming together, and it just gives you an idea of just how open the space is that we have available to us here. So one of the reasons we went ground mount is obviously I'm actually I take a lot of pride in DIY and maximizing the money that we're bringing in. And so that's a fancy way of saying I'm kind of cheap. So I like to do things on my own. It's not just for the money. I get a strong sense of pride from, maintaining this house and this property and doing things on my own. It's very pride driven. But at any rate, you can see in the lower right here, the snow, by having a ground mount, my daughter and I can come out in the mornings in the winter and it's kind of become a daddy-daughter thing where we come out and, brush the snow off and it's a fun thing that we can do. And then that means that I'm generating that much more power during the day in winter situations. So aside from that, my roof needs to be replaced here in probably the next 5 or 10 years. And I didn't want to deal with all this stuff on my roof. With us having all the open space, it was kind of a no-brainer. And so we have SMA Sunny Boy string inverters, and for the most part, Korean-made 305-watt panels, and it's a string setup. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next minute. And then I actually added Sense energy monitoring to the house, and I say the house because Sense gives us energy monitoring on the solar array as well as the energy that we're using, whether it's from the grid or from the solar. And so I'll explain more about that in a second, but that has proven to be a really cool resource for someone like me who loves data. So after our first year, we ended up with a system that unfortunately was a little undersized, and not to belabor the point, we had a little bit of mix up in the numbers, and unfortunately it was built just a little bit undersized. And so I did have some power bills the first winter. And the other thing that I noticed earlier, like December of last year or so, was that, based on it being a string system, the way a string setup works is each inverter has multiple strings on it. And within a string, there might be 5 panels. And if you recall, I have 300-watt panels. And if one panel in that string is only operating at 200 watts, then the rest of the panels on that string are only operating at 200 as well. And so you're only as good as your weakest panel on the string. And the way I found this out was using my Sense energy monitor, could tell it was a sunny day and I was generating almost no power. So I thought I had an issue. Come to find out, there was still some straggler snow hanging on to just a few of the panels, and just maybe 5 or 10% of some of the panels were covered. And when I scraped that off, all of a sudden my power generation skyrocketed. And so I reached to the Facebook group and started asking questions. And my path crossed with Paul Cusack from West Michigan Solar, who answered some questions. And long story short, I decided to expand the system a little bit. And he was nice enough to let me pay him to consult. Learned a lot from him in terms of wiring the system, what I needed to make it a much more 100% solution for us, and worked with him to basically add 10 more panels, as well as optimization. And so the optimization, what that does in a string setup, each panel has what's called this optimizer, as you see on the screen. It's basically a black box of magic, and it essentially allows each panel to be on their own within a string setup. So I won't have the snow problems or the shade problems where you know, one weak panel causes the rest in the string to generate weak as well. You know, knowing that I don't have really no shade, I didn't necessarily need to optimize, but with the snow and my taking over the maintenance of the system, I wanted to have 100% view at the panel level. So that data view was of interest to me as well. And so anyway, we added that, and that obviously got us to a point now where I'm quite confident that we've got 100% solution, not maybe a little over. And so I'm looking forward to 0 power bills from this point forward. In terms of the monitoring that we have available to us through SMA or the Sunny Portal, that's through the inverter company. We do have kind of an overall generation view. It's pretty limited. I mean, you get some stats, like here's the main screen. You can see the power that I'm currently generating, a little bit of stats based on this year, 2020. It gives you monitoring and messaging that comes to my phone if there are issues that it finds and things like that. It also gives you a view down to the month or even the day level. And then you can even look at individual inverters as well as compare year to year how you're generating. And you can see a spike right here. And these 2 lines represent right after I installed the extra panels and optimized. So I'm totally expecting to see a spike here because I have the ability to generate much more power now. And lastly, you get this inverter management view. I have 2 inverters, so I can bring either the inverters up and at any time make sure that everything's, you know, humming along like it's supposed to. I mentioned Sense before. Sense is a private company that they're really known for their artificial intelligence software, and what they're trying to do is use AI to capture electric pulses in your electricity in your home to determine what household appliances are running at what time. So they claim they can find your devices over time, and then you can track at the individual appliance level the power that you're using. It works. I've got some appliances that are found, but not all, and they've gotten a lot of flack for it not working real well. But that really wasn't why I went with Sense. I wanted to go with Sense because I wanted a more holistic picture of my energy use plus my energy generation, so solar and the use. And so this screen, you can kind of see, you know, all the orange is the great solar that I generated last month. I mean, there was only a couple days where I barely broke even. All the rest, I was just way over and just earned a ton of credits. But over here, you can see where I see my home usage, what I generated, and also what I sent to the grid. So it's kind of a nice way for me to compare my numbers to what consumers sends me to make sure everything is you know, copacetic. The other cool thing is with Sense, I can get real-time view down to the minute or the second of what I'm generating. This is the orange is what I'm generating, and the red is what I'm using. These spikes here are my water heater. And we'll talk a little bit more about the water heater in a minute. And then with Tygo, this is the company that makes the optimizers that went on each panel. That gives me even more data views. So this, obviously, the general view gives you pretty much the same kind of view as the other options that I have. So it's kind of a cool way to compare. But then here I can get all the way down to the panel level and see what voltage I'm generating, the current, as well as the power that I've made for the day, or at the real-time data set that I have at my fingertips. So moving away from solar real quick, just to explain what geothermal is. Geothermal essentially is taking advantage of a constant temperature under the ground. So in a geothermal closed loop situation, there is a huge long line of pipe with a liquid in it that's basically set at 5 to 7 feet under the ground, where it's a constant 45 to 50 degrees. And so much like your central air unit that's sitting outside, that's just a heat pump, but it's using air instead of this liquid. And so this liquid comes in to the heat pump, which is in the basement, just looks like a standard furnace. And that liquid comes in, and everybody's first question is, well, if the liquid's at 50 degrees and it's 30 degrees outside and you need heat in your home, how does it get from 50 to the 90-degree heat that it's sending throughout your air ducts? Well, the liquid comes in, and then this process takes over where it turns it into a gas, and then it compresses the gas, and that compression of the gas disperses a lot of heat. It releases a lot of heat, and that's where it captures the extra heat that then is ported through a heat exchange, just like a normal furnace, and then the blower blows it throughout the house, and we have comfortable heat, and it keeps the house at a really nice temperature. There's many types of geo loops you can go with. Closed is what I just talked about. Open is basically where it uses your water, which is less efficient because then your well pump's running or you're using city water. It's certainly not as efficient, but cheaper in the upfront cost. And then they have vertical loops too that they basically bore directly down if you're not lucky enough to have property. It's a really efficient, I mean, EPA calls it the most efficient way to heat and cool your home right now. And cooling is of the most efficient with Geo. It's pretty astounding how little electricity we use in the summer. We're kind of the opposite of most homeowners. We're not using any in the summer, and then we use more in the winter. So that's a little bit about what Geo is. In terms of our system, it's not for the faint of heart. As you can see from the photos, this trench is about 450 feet long. We needed about 900 feet of the lines there. You can see the little 3/4 inch water lines here. And the way they did it with half the space is they dug down to about 7 feet and then laid the lines, backfilled about a foot of earth on top of those lines. And then when they got to the end, they turned around and then came right back. So that's how we got 900 feet under the frost line in half the trenching space. We also are pretty close to we have a wetland and a pond on our property, and there's more agitation, they call it. The closer to water you can get, they can only get so close based on EPA rules, but that also makes it more efficient because we're on the wetland. We took that trench pretty close to it, and so you can see on the lower right there, at least the right for me, you can see it just looks like a standard furnace. In my utility room, there's just an extra pump, and that pump on that white wall is essentially what's pumping the liquid in and out basically constantly. So it's got a variable speed motor, and it's always kind of running unless we're in the shoulder season when it doesn't have to run at all. The other cool thing, because we have an electric water heater, we were able to get a Geo heat pump that had hot water generation included. And so we plumbed the hot water heater into it, which means that Geo pump, when it's running, it's preheating the water and warming it to go into the water heater, which basically negates using the electric heater elements, which use a lot of electricity. It's not the most efficient way of heating your water. And so by preheating it, when I say warm, I'm talking 115, 120 degrees is going into that water heater. So in the winter and in the summer when the Geo pump's really running, those electric elements aren't coming on hardly all, maybe 4 or 5 times a day. Where in the winter, or in the shoulder months rather, they're coming on way more often, depending on our demand. We're big, my wife and I are big into keeping our dollars as local as we can. So the companies we worked with for Geo was Rogers Refrigeration out of Richland, Michigan. Really cool, small family company, really prideful in what they do. We really like them quite a bit. 4 Elements Energy, Art Toy, like I mentioned, for solar, as well as then consulting and adding onto our solar upgrades through Paul Cusack at West Michigan Solar. So in terms of like what I tell everyone essentially that I get a chance to talk to about solar is get into it as fast as you can. I know it sounds like a dirty sales pitch, but I get nothing out of it other than the satisfaction of another homeowner saving money and helping the environment. And the most important advice that I would give you as a prospective, customer, get a bunch of bids. What I have found is they do differ But the local installers, the ones that you'll find right here in Michigan, which there's some great installers right here, they're all going to come in pretty close to each other in price. But they all do things a little differently. And like I was saying to John earlier, you know, I learned a lot in this process. And had I known then what I know now, you know, life is like that. I probably would have done things a little differently, but I'm still really happy with how everything, you know, ended up. Ask a lot of questions, you know, ask about how they're going to do their work, how long it takes, why it takes, you know, X amount of days or what have you. Engage with other installers and networks like the GLREA, join them, go out to the Facebook group. I mean, it's a wonderful resource. Go and look at other people's arrays. Every solar owner loves showing it off, so they welcome you with open arms. And so use those kinds of things. And I say go solar ASAP because the credits are dwindling. We're already down to 26% federal tax credit this year. It's going to go down again next year and potentially gone the year after. So the time is really now. So that's what I have. I think we've got plenty of time left for some questions or anything that's on your mind. So I'll turn it over to you, John. Facilitate that.
Yeah, why don't you stop screen sharing and then we'll be able to see all the participants. You know, I've got a question for you. I'm just kind of curious.
Yep.
Do you have any sense for what portion of your solar power is used for the EV charging and how much is used for the geothermal heating and cooling?
I don't have numbers, but I can tell you that based on what I'm seeing from Sense, my EV charger, it's a pretty heavy draw. It's using, I think it charges at right around 4 kilowatts for 4 hours long if it's at fully drained status. So on a lot of days, that accounts for about 15% of my energy use. The Geo, you know, like right now, it's hot outside. I'm running that thing. It's probably right now using the amount of energy that maybe 6 or 7 light bulbs would take, incandescent light bulbs would take, so 700 watts. In the really cold winter when it's really humming, which we haven't had a lot of the last few years, it'll be using like 8,000 or 9,000. But that's a rare thing. Most of the time it's common between 1,000 and 2,000. So I don't have a number in terms of the percentage though on the Geo. I'll have to do a little math on that.
That was helpful. You know,
Yeah.
If somebody would like to ask a question, just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yeah, this is Roger Eberhard. I have a question about the Sense program. You mentioned potentially being able to compare what you're seeing from the Sense program with what Consumers is doing for their net metering.
Mm-hmm.
Have you actually done that, and have you noted any discrepancies at all?
I did do that. And so the first few months I was seeing a lot of people complaining about discrepancies with other utilities on the Facebook group. And so I decided to do some simple math in Excel and brought in all the numbers from the spreadsheet that Consumers gives you each month, compared that, ran some math, only pulling the data from Sense that would be grid data, so what I've sent to the grid. And I tell you what, I did it for 4 months. And every month I was within 5 kilowatt hours of what they gave me. And that was so close, I stopped doing it. I just earned trust. They earned my trust, and I just stopped doing the math. So I was really impressed.
Thanks.
You betcha.
Hi, Josh, Terry Richards here. Very quick one. When you say the Facebook page, is that the GLREA Facebook page, or?
It's the Michigan Solar's user group.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yep. Great, thank you.
That's been just a huge resource. I was telling John earlier, I really wish I would have found that and joined that prior to going solar. I think what I've learned from that group, the installers and the owners and the problems they've gone through, lessons learned, is just a wealth of knowledge. Had I known, I probably would have done things a little differently. Like I said, I'm still really happy with everything. But I would have approached it a little differently with that knowledge.
Great. Nice presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks. So I'll tell you a little bit about my EV. So if you're not familiar with the Chevy Volt, I'm so disappointed to see Chevy stop production of that. For someone like me, I give a lot of presentations. I lead a lot of trips for my photography. And so I have times when I'm traveling either for that or for my real work. And, you know, the way I travel 100% EV like a Tesla is really not in the cards for me just quite yet. And so having the dual technology has worked out really well for me because 96% of the time I'm 100% electric on my normal daily commute with the kids and work. But on that rare occasion, I have to go to the airport or drive across the state or whatever, gas takes over and I'm humming along like nothing's wrong. And so it's been a really great car. Again, like John pointed out, it does draw the energy when it's really charging. But like right now, I'm getting 55, 60 miles on a charge. And because of the COVID stuff, I'm not driving hardly all. So all the credits that I'm making right now are in part to upgrading my system, but also the fact that I'm not charging my car. And so I'm just rolling in these credits at the moment.
Hey Josh, this is Dave Reuter.
Yeah.
I have a heating system that's a hot water system, and I'm curious on what your hot water loop temperature is off your geothermal for the wintertime.
In the wintertime, the water that's coming out of the geo pump going into the tank is between 110 and 120 degrees.
Okay, yeah, and I run at about 160, so is there anything that would pump it up, or?
You know, I don't know. I could ask my my guy at Rogers, and who knows, you know, where I'm testing it. Maybe it's coming out of there a little warmer than I think, but I do know that I have our hot water tank temperature set at about 120. And when it's really running in the winter, our water's hotter than it normally is. But I could talk to him and see if, you know, if that could be turned up. I just kind of put my trust in them to set it up to be the most efficient. And he did ask me questions about, you know, the temperature that I run my water at and things like that. So,
all right, and
that's interesting.
I can contact them and ask them. Yeah, and the way the system that I have is run off of a boiler right now, but then it goes to air handlers, so it's like normal forced air. And then the water tank is water to water exchange, so it uses the hot water to heat the hot water.
I see. I gotcha. Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Hey, Josh, you mentioned that, you know, in hindsight, you've learned some things. Of course, you do some things differently. Could you give us a few examples of things you might have done differently?
Yeah, so I think I would have asked a lot more questions about the string inverter setup, and I would have asked installers more about, you know, microinverter setups versus string, whether to optimize and where you get the biggest bang for your buck. In terms of the install, I think I would have done things a little different. So for a perfect example, right now we have the solar, of course, is DC, high voltage DC that goes into the inverters. Our inverters are down at the array, 175 feet from the panel. And so we had to go with 100 amp wire, AC wire, to go into the house to the panel because of the amount. The 175 feet represents in AC quite a bit of line loss. And when I'm comparing my data at the inverter, at the panels, compared to where it hits the panel in the house, I'm losing a considerable amount, even, you know, upwards of 2 or 3%. And so one of the things that Paul and some others have recommended was, you know, putting the inverters in the garage, running high voltage DC underground, which as high voltage would have less line loss. And then that also puts the inverters in the garage out of the elements. Yes, they are fine to be outside in the elements, but I've had the biggest problem that I've had actually are on the surge protectors that they installed. I've had 3 get water in them and go bad, and they're $110 each. And not cool. I'm not happy about that. So I'm already exploring options of, you know, kind of taking care of that. But at the end of the day, I think I probably would have pushed to go DC under the ground had I known then what I know now. But I am also interested to know, like, if there's any installers on the line, if over 175 feet, they have experience on whether DC would have more or less line loss over that distance. And that's something I should ask on the Facebook group, give them an example and see what the installers say.
Yeah.
I'll have to do that.
Yeah, put out that
So,
question. It'd be interesting to see what folks started or what folks say. And when you first did your installation, did the DC issue even come up?
It did, and between my 4 Elements and the electrician they work with, they really said, you know, for the cost of the 100 amp wire related to all the other costs, it wasn't really a big deal, and they felt that I would have under 1% loss. Which, here's where it gets tricky. The first year, as I'm monitoring both my inverter compared to my Sense house data, it was 1% or less. But now I'm noticing it's 2 or 3%, which makes it makes no sense to me at all, like how it would change when nothing else has changed. But I'm seeing the percentages, and I have to imagine the math doesn't lie.
Yeah.
Which is the higher voltage, the AC or DC?
DC, I believe. I want to say it's, God, I'd have to add it up, but I want to say it's 400 or 500 volts.
Okay, because there's what's called I²R losses. So, you know, the power is going to be the same. And so if the voltage is higher, then the I component is lower. So if your DC is the highest, then you're going to have less loss on the highest voltage part because the I² part. So when you dropped it down in voltage to go AC, that increased your current, and it probably quadrupled your loss.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's really interesting. Now I want to do some reading about that.
Yeah,
so now I want to do some
I²R losses.
Yeah, and I want to look a little deeper at my setup too to see the voltage and compare it.
Yeah.
We've got about a couple minutes left before we get cut off. Thank you very much, Josh. This has been great. It's been very interesting. And I think we do probably have time for one more question.
I had my hand up. I wanted to know if anyone in the group knows about microgrids, where crossing property lines to sell to your neighbors. I just came back after 10 years in New York City to my Ann Arbor house, and so, you know, downtown housing in close proximity, and wanting the church to put a solar canopy in the parking lot across the street. But who knows about regulations? And I know that LO3 Energy will provide equipment so you can sell to each other, but what are the laws here in Michigan?
Well, I can say that, you know, you can't cross property lines because then you become a utility and you're subject to regulation. And so microgrids can be done, but in kind of very certain specific situations. Now there is legislation in Michigan that's being proposed that will make it easier to do microgrids. But right now, you know, you could say that the MSU campus is a microgrid, of course, but if you think in terms of like you and your neighbors coming up with a microgrid, I can't do it. The utilities will not be happy with that.
I got to find out how they did it with Brooklyn microgrid.
Well, every state has different laws and different regulations, and so some states are